Vienna, September 11th, 1683. The air stinks of gunpowder, of disease, and of a despair so thick it clings to the soul like the cold sweat of fear. From the shattered ramparts, the last defenders, hollow-eyed, starving specters, gaze upon an ocean of silk and steel that stretches to the horizon. These are the tents of the Ottoman army, an empire-made encampment, and for 2 months they have withstood its fury. They have eaten rats, then cats, and now they feast on hope itself. Each explosion from the Ottoman mines is a hammer blow on the city's coffin. They know the final assault is imminent, that Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa is preparing his elite janissaries for the final thrust. Vienna, the golden apple of Christendom, is about to fall, and with it, perhaps, an entire continent. But fate is a capricious storyteller, and in the darkest of moments, it often kindles a flame in the most unexpected of places. Atop the Kahlenberg mountain, at the back of the besieging army, another force observes the doomed city. It is not a mirage born of fever and hunger, but a coalition forged in the crucible of imminent annihilation. Poles, Germans, Austrians. They are the Holy League, a relief army that seems like a drop of water against a forest fire. Yet their leader, the Polish King John III Sobieski, does not see desperation. He sees an opportunity, a single crack in the giant's armor. He is about to unleash the most audacious, most reckless, and most glorious gamble in military history, a wager that will decide everything in a single thunderous charge. This is not merely the story of a battle. It is the chronicle of how one man's blinding arrogance can forge the very weapon that will destroy him. The victory at Vienna was not won solely by the force of a cavalry charge, however massive it was. It was won because a commander, Kara Mustafa, obsessed with personal glory and the plunder of Europe's richest city, fatally underestimated his enemy. He kept his best troops in the trenches, facing the city, while the true danger gathered at his back. The charge of the winged Hussars, the thunder of 18,000 horsemen descending from the hills, was not a blind attack, but the perfectly timed spearhead that plunged into that single, catastrophic flaw, turning the defense of an empire into an undying legend. High on the wooded hills, a warrior king contemplates his destiny and that of an entire continent. He is John III Sobieski of Poland, an aging lion, yet with the fire of faith burning in his eyes. He is no palace monarch. He is a strategist forged in 1,000 battles, a devout Catholic who feels the weight of Christendom on his shoulders. Under his command, a heterogeneous army of 70,000 souls, Poles, Austrians, and Germans, united by an oath and the threat of annihilation. But his true trump card, the hammer he waits to unleash, is his Polish cavalry. And at the heart of that cavalry, like angels of death awaiting the order to charge, are 3,000 winged Hussars, the most fearsome shock force in Europe, horsemen who consider themselves the armed hand of God on earth. Facing this David of faith and steel stands a Goliath of unmeasured ambition, the Grand Vizier Mirzifonlu Kara Mustafa Pasha, Supreme Commander of the Ottoman army. His confidence is not mere assurance. It is an arrogance as vast as the empire he serves. He has disobeyed the direct orders of Sultan Mehmed IV, who instructed him to secure the border fortresses. But for Kara Mustafa, that was a goal unworthy of his greatness. His eyes were fixed on a much greater prize, Vienna, the mythical golden apple, whose conquest would grant him immortal glory and unimaginable riches. He sees the relief army on the hills not as a threat, but as an annoying delay to his personal coronation, a final obstacle before the treasures of the Habsburgs fill his coffers. The power that backs his pride is almost inconceivable. He leads a force of between 150,000 and 200,000 men, a city in motion that has made the earth tremble from Istanbul to the Danube. At its core are the Janissaries, the Sultan's elite infantry, slave soldiers raised for war, masters of siegecraft, and fanatics in close combat. Alongside them, thousands of expert sappers have spent 2 months digging a labyrinth of trenches and tunnels to blow Vienna's walls. And like a swarm of hornets, the fearsome Tatar cavalry, masters of the raid and the skirmish, patrol the flanks. The Ottoman army is not just a military force. It is a machine of conquest perfected over centuries, seemingly invincible in its power and scale. Yet, At the heart of this colossal force lies its fatal weakness, a crack born directly from its leader's arrogance. Kara Mustafa's obsession with capturing the city intact so that he might plunder it at his leisure has become his strategic blindness. Even with the Holy League's army descending upon him, he refuses to withdraw his best troops, the Janissaries, from the siege trenches. He believes he can crush Sobieski with his field forces while his elites deliver the coup de grace to Vienna. This catastrophic decision leaves his right flank dangerously exposed and his own headquarters, the beating heart of his army, vulnerable to a direct assault. He has prepared a feast, but has forgotten to watch his own door. The dawn of September 12th spills over the Vienna woods like watered-down wine, revealing the world's largest chessboard. From the heights of the Kahlenberg, the maneuver has begun. The Holy League's army does not charge blindly. It begins a slow, methodical descent, a serpent of steel slithering down the steep, wooded slopes. The terrain is both its jailer and its ally, slowing its advance but concealing its true numbers and devastating potential from Ottoman eyes. Below, in the Grand Vizier's camp, the movement is perceived, the distant drums are heard, but the full scale of the threat remains veiled by the trees and morning mist. The commanders on both sides hold their breath. The bloodiest game of the century is about to begin, and the first piece moves with the rising sun. But the genius of Jan Sobieski lies not in haste, but in a predatory patience. He knows that his ultimate weapon, the Polish cavalry, is a hammer designed for a single shattering blow. It would be a waste to use it against a wall of fresh, organized steel. Therefore, he allows the Imperial and German forces, under the command of the Duke of Lorraine, to initiate the combat. For hours, the battle will be an infantry hell, a brutal attrition in the fortified villages at the foot of the hills. Every musket fired, every charge contained, is part of the Polish king's grand plan to exhaust the enemy and draw him into his trap. The charge that will define history is about to be unleashed, a thunder that will crush an empire. To march alongside the winged Hussars in their moment of immortal glory and not miss the clash that will change the world, join our Legion of History by subscribing and leaving your like. The thunder is about to break. It is 4 a.m. Darkness still clings to the hills as the Holy League's infantry begins its advance. It is not a charge, but a slow, agonizing descent through treacherous terrain, covered in forests and vineyards. The Austrians and Germans lead the assault, a tide of steel destined to crash against the Ottoman front lines. The battle erupts in a cacophony of musket fire and artillery. In the fortified villages of Neusdorf and Heiligenstadt, the fighting becomes a savage, close-quarters butchery. Every house is a fortress, every alley a death trap. For hours, the battle is a monstrous meat grinder, where courage is measured in blood and progress is counted in meters, not kilometers. It is a calculated sacrifice, a bloody distraction to prepare the final blow. From the Ottoman perspective, the attack is fierce but manageable. They are accustomed to the brutality of combat, and their numerical superiority fills them with confidence. They fight with the fanaticism of those defending the glory of their sultan and the promise of unprecedented spoils. They see themselves as an anvil, enduring the blows of the Christian hammer descending from the hills, while the other hammer, their elite Janissaries, prepares to pulverize the walls of Vienna. The battle stretches across the front, a titanic struggle that consumes entire regiments. The gunpowder smoke mixes with the morning fog, creating an infernal veil that conceals the true scale of Sobieski's strategy. They believe they are winning a battle of attrition, not realizing they are being deliberately bled. By midday, Sobieski's plan is bearing fruit. The Ottoman frontline troops, having endured more than 8 hours of uninterrupted combat, are exhausted. They have held the advance, but at a terrible cost in men and morale. Most importantly, the Allied infantry has achieved its objective. They have secured the ground at the base of the hills, establishing a launch platform for the cavalry. They have engaged and pinned down the bulk of the Ottoman field army, stretching its lines to the breaking point. The stage is meticulously set. The orchestra has warmed its instruments with a symphony of steel and gunpowder. Now it only awaits the conductor's signal for the final, thunderous crescendo that will decide everything. In his luxurious command tent, surrounded by silk and servants, Kara Mustafa receives a constant flow of alarming reports. His generals on the battlefield beg him to release the Janissaries from the siege trenches. They see their lines weakening, see the Christian infantry gaining ground slowly but inexorably. They warn him that the threat from the hills is real and that elite reinforcements are needed to repel it. But the Grand Vizier's arrogance is a fortress more impenetrable than the walls of Vienna. He dismisses the warnings, blinded by the vision of imminent plunder. The city is about to fall. He can hear it in the roar of the final mines. He will not sacrifice the glory of conquest for a skirmish in his rear. This decision, born of pride and greed, seals his fate. For Kara Mustafa, the Janissaries are not just troops. They are his personal key to unlocking the Habsburg treasures. To withdraw them from the trenches would be to admit that his master plan is flawed, that he has underestimated the infidels. It is an affront to his ego that he simply cannot tolerate. With a dismissive gesture, he orders his commanders to hold with the forces they have, convinced that his Sipahi cavalry is more than enough to scatter the Christian rabble. In that moment, he not only ignores his generals, but turns his back on fate itself, inviting catastrophe into his camp. He has chosen gold over victory, and he will pay the price in blood. The poison of this order seeps through the veins of the Ottoman army. The soldiers on the front, exhausted and outnumbered, feel betrayed. They fight and die while their elite comrades, the feared Janissaries, watch from the safety of the trenches, waiting to collect the spoils. Doubt, an enemy more lethal than any sword, begins to spread through the ranks. The esprit de corps that had made them so formidable begins to crumble. They are being sacrificed not for the empire, but for the vanity of a single man. This psychological wound, invisible but deep, weakens the Ottoman army more than all the casualties suffered during the morning. The giant, rotten from within, begins to sway, awaiting the push that will bring it down. It is almost 5 in the afternoon. The sun, low on the horizon, bathes the battlefield in a bloody red. From his elevated position, Jan III Sobieski, the warrior king, sees it all with divine clarity. He sees the Ottoman lines, disordered and weakened. He sees the exhaustion in their movements and the desperation in their resistance. He recognizes the precise moment that the patience and sacrifice of his allies have bought him. It is the pause in the enemy's breath, the crack in the Leviathan's armor. He gives the signal. A single cannon shot rings out over the din of battle. It is the end of the waiting. It is the beginning of the legend. The time for patience is over. The time for thunder has come. As if the forest itself gave birth to an army of ghosts, the cavalry emerges into view at the top of the ridge. The sight is both magnificent and terrifying. 18,000 horsemen, a wall of man and beast stretching for nearly 2 kilometers. And at the forefront, like the tip of God's own spear, ride the 3,000 winged Hussars. The setting sun glints off their polished cuirasses, and the iconic eagle feather wings attached to their backs hiss in the wind, creating a supernatural, demonic silhouette. They do not look like soldiers. They look like a force of nature, a divine judgment unleashed upon the mortal world. A deep, guttural roar, the war cry of thousands of throats, begins to roll down the hill, a sound that freezes the blood. The largest cavalry charge in history has begun. It is not a desperate sprint, but a controlled avalanche. They start at a walk, then a trot, and finally, a methodically accelerating gallop, allowing the massive formation to maintain its weight and cohesion. The ground vibrates, then trembles, as if the world itself were being torn asunder. For the Ottoman soldiers below, trapped between the Allied infantry and this apocalyptic vision, it is the embodiment of annihilation. They have fought men all day, but what now descends upon them is a living earthquake, a tsunami of steel and fury aimed directly at their exposed heart. Fear, cold and absolute, seizes them long before the first impact. The crash is cataclysmic, a sound like the end of the world. The Hussars' long 6-meter lances, the kopias, strike the Ottoman lines with unstoppable force. They pierce armor, shields, and bodies as if they were paper, disintegrating the front ranks in an explosion of violence. The cohesion of the Ottoman infantry, already worn down, evaporates in an instant. No formation, no discipline, no courage can withstand such kinetic impact. It is a 1,000-ton hammer striking a pane of glass. The lines do not break. They are pulverized. Panic becomes the only command, and flight the only tactic. The battle of attrition is over. The slaughter has begun. The tide of cavalry does not stop. After the initial impact, the broken lances are discarded and sabers are drawn. The Hussars and the rest of the Allied cavalry become a whirlwind of cutting steel, carving their way through the terrified mass. Their advance is not random. It is a surgical strike aimed at the nerve center of the Ottoman army, the opulent camp of the Grand Vizier. Their target is the commander's red and gold standard, the sacred symbol of his authority. To capture the standard and the command tent is to decapitate the army, to transform a retreat into a total and irreversible rout. Every saber stroke, every horse that tramples an enemy, brings them closer to their prey. From his command post, Kara Mustafa watches in disbelief as the apocalypse bears down on him. The wave of Polish steel has swept aside his guards and is heading straight for his tent. In that instant, his legendary arrogance shatters, replaced by the most primal, abject terror. There is no heroic last stand, no defiance of death. The man who dreamed of being the conqueror of Vienna abandons the sacred standard of the prophet, abandons his army, abandons his honor, and flees for his own life. His cowardly escape is the final signal. The Ottoman army, leaderless, morale shattered, and hopeless, ceases to exist as a fighting force. It becomes a torrent of terrified men, sealing the most humiliating defeat in the history of the empire. When the last echo of the charge faded, the silence that fell upon the battlefield was more terrifying than the roar of the cannons. It was a silence pregnant with the groans of thousands of dying men, a requiem for a humiliated empire. The statistics of the slaughter revealed a brutal and asymmetric truth. For fewer than 4,000 casualties, killed and wounded, the Holy League had inflicted over 15,000 on the Ottoman army, capturing another 5,000. But these figures do not tell the full story. The Grand Vizier's colossal army did not retreat. It evaporated. It became a stampede of terrified phantoms, haunted by the specters of their own arrogance, abandoning weapons, standards, and any vestige of discipline in their desperate race to nowhere. The world's greatest war machine had been shattered in a single afternoon. And what of the architect of this disaster, Grand Vizier Merzifonlu Kara Mustafa Pasha? His cowardly flight saved his life on the battlefield, only for him to face a more ignominious fate. He managed to escape to Belgrade, gathering the shattered remnants of his pride and his army. But the news of the greatest humiliation in Ottoman history traveled faster than he did. Sultan Mehmed IV, furious at the disobedience and the catastrophic failure, showed no mercy. The ambition that had led Kara Mustafa to the gates of Vienna became his death sentence. On December 25, 1683, the day his enemies celebrated the birth of their savior, agents of the Sultan delivered him a silk cord. He was strangled, his head sent to Istanbul in a velvet box as proof that the price of imperial failure is paid with one's life. As night descended, the victorious soldiers of the Holy League entered the Ottoman camp, and what they found surpassed any fable. It was a city of riches abandoned in a moment of panic. Silk tents embroidered with gold thread, priceless Persian carpets, chests overflowing with jewels and coins, and entire arsenals of scimitars with ivory hilts. They found exotic animals never before seen in Europe, camels and parrots that added a surreal note to the surrounding carnage. It was the plunder of an empire, a tangible testament to the arrogance of a man who had brought the luxuries of his palace to the battlefield. Among all this treasure, the soldiers found thousands of sacks filled with strange, dark beans, whose true value and the future they would brew for Vienna no one could yet imagine. The Battle of Vienna was not merely a victory. It was a tectonic turning point in the history of Europe. The thunder of the winged Hussars' charge marked the abrupt and definitive end of Ottoman expansion into the heart of the continent. For more than 3 centuries, the Turkish tide had risen inexorably, threatening to engulf Christendom. Vienna was the breakwater, the point where that tide crashed, broke, and began to recede forever. From that day, September 12, 1683, the Ottoman Empire, the terror of Europe, would enter a long and painful era of defense and decline. The strategic initiative shifted permanently from Istanbul to the European capitals, which now saw the opportunity not only to defend, but to reclaim lost territories in the Balkans. The most direct political consequence of this victory resonated in the halls of power for decades. The Holy Roman Empire, saved from the brink of the abyss, initiated a series of victorious counteroffensives known as the Great Turkish War. This war would culminate in 1699 with the Treaty of Karlowitz, a document that redrew the map of southeastern Europe. For the first time, the Ottoman Empire was forced to cede vast territories to the Habsburgs, including most of Hungary, Transylvania, and Slavonia. This treaty was not a simple truce. It was the formal admission that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Vienna had not only saved a city, it had set in motion the mechanism that would dismantle Ottoman dominion in Europe, piece by piece. Beyond politics and strategy, the victory at Vienna was instantly transformed into a foundational myth for European and Christian identity. It became the definitive narrative of Western civilization defending itself against an existential threat. John III, Sobieski was hailed not as a Polish king, but as the savior of Christendom, an almost messianic figure whose faith and military genius had preserved the continent's future. The image of the winged Hussars descending from the hills was seared into the collective consciousness, becoming the eternal symbol of chivalric courage, of the triumph of the few against the many, and of divine intervention in the affairs of men. The battle transcended military history to become a cultural epic. This event cemented the idea of a united Europe, not by politics, but by a shared identity and faith in the face of an external other. It reinforced the position of the Habsburg dynasty as the primary defenders of Catholicism and laid the groundwork for the rise of the Austrian Empire as a major European power. The legend of Vienna was told and retold in sermons, poems, and paintings, each retelling adding more polish to Sobieski's armor and more ferocity to his hussars. It became a powerful instrument of propaganda and a source of inspiration, a reminder that even when the darkness seems total, a bold charge and visionary leadership can change the course of history and forge a new dawn from despair. History, however, keeps its most curious echoes in the smallest details. Among the unimaginable spoils abandoned in the Ottoman camp, alongside the jewels and sabers, were those hundreds of sacks filled with strange, dark, aromatic beans. To the victorious soldiers, they were a mystery, perhaps an exotic type of camel feed, and they were on the verge of throwing them into the Danube. But as legend has it, a cunning Polish spy named Jerzy Franciszek Kulczycki, who had lived in Ottoman territory and knew their customs, recognized their true value. He had spent the siege infiltrating enemy lines to carry messages, and as a reward for his heroism, he asked to keep those seemingly useless sacks. The Viennese, bewildered, agreed to his peculiar request, unaware that they were witnessing the birth of a new cultural era. With those coffee beans rescued from the spoils of war, Kulczycki opened Vienna's first coffee house, the Blue Bottle. At first, the bitter drink did not please the Viennese, but Kulczycki, an innovator as well as a hero, began to experiment, adding milk and honey to soften its taste. Thus, a tradition was born. The city that had been saved by the greatest cavalry charge in history would soon be conquered by a new culture that revolved around this dark, stimulating beverage. In this way, the final echo of the battle was not the clash of steel, but the clinking of cups in Viennese cafes, an ironic and delicious reminder that sometimes the most enduring legacy of a war is not victory or defeat, but the taste of a new world born from the ashes of the old.